Good afternoon again. My name is Afton Thomas, Associate Director for Programs here at the Center for the Study of Southern Culture, and welcome to the first SouthTalk of the fall semester. This academic year, both fall and spring, and the majority of our events will fall under the theme of Mississippi Voices, where we will ask questions such as whose voices have been heard and whose voices have been drowned out. We want to look for times when Mississippi has led and continues to lead, and for times when we have misled ourselves. We want to reflect on choices to stay and work in this place and choices to leave and look back, frequently or never. In blending these many voices of Mississippi, we also plan to listen for the future of the state, the South, our country, and our common world. With today's topic and speaker, I have reminded myself that Mississippi is a place that has never lacked for inspiration. And we hope that stories, new and familiar, will continue to inspire and motivate progress. Now that we have been at this virtual events thing for a while, we have all developed preferences. And it is important to me that when coordinating each SouthTalk, I ask each speaker what format they prefer. And Dr. DeBerry opted for a meeting style so that he could engage with the audience in conversation. And he also shared that his favorite part is the Q&A. So hint, hint, no pressure. I know some of you are probably eating. This is lunchtime. If you want to have your video off, that is okay. And perhaps you turn it on for the Q&A or you don't. It's okay. I just wanted to put it out there that it is okay to have your video on and engage and laugh and be a part of the conversation, if laughing is appropriate. I am now going to turn it over to my colleague, visiting professor of English and Southern Studies, as well as writer in residence at the Center for the Study of Southern Culture here at the University of Mississippi, Ralph Eubanks. But first, I have to say, Ralph is zooming in from Cambridge, Massachusetts, where he currently is on fellowship with the Harvard Radcliffe Institute. Congratulations again on this honor, and thank you for making time to take part in this event.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be here. How could I miss the first SouthTalk of the semester? I mean, really. It's a real pleasure to be here today to introduce Roy DeBerry. Just 4 years ago, Roy reached out to me with a project that at the time he was calling Hearts and Minds, and was thinking about how this could really be organized, how these oral histories he'd been collecting could be organized into a book. And I was attracted to the stories right away. It's largely because of the diversity of the voices that were part of this collection. So, with a little bit of editorial back and forth, my background is as an editor, and eventually this ends up at the University Press of Mississippi. And today we're talking about a finished book, which is great. But my real attraction to this project, and when I talked with Craig Gill at University Press of Mississippi, is that so much of civil rights history, particularly in Mississippi, focuses on those places where the cameras documented what happened. This is a project that really looks at one of those places that the cameras weren't rolling. And we see how the movement affected the lives of ordinary people outside the reach of the media. And that's really my attraction to the project. And this project is also a testimony to the power of oral history, which is a big part of our work at the Center for the Study of Southern Culture. And the voices in this book, I believe, reveal how the largest forces of history affect the everyday struggles of the people of Benton County. So it's a pleasure to introduce Roy DeBerry. Roy DeBerry is the executive director of the Hill Country Project. He is a native of Holly Springs, Mississippi. He received his BA, MA, and PhD from Brandeis University, just about 7 miles from where I am right now, in political science. And he is recently retired from Jackson State University as Vice President for Economic Development. So it's a great pleasure to turn you over now to Roy DeBerry to talk about his Hill Country project.
Thank you, Ralph. And I think we'll show a video before I start.
That's right.
Thank you so much for those kind words. And thank you so much for that history. And thank you so much for being a mentor to this project.
My mother wouldn't talk about that often. Way back in the when they were buying people. Slavery. Buying people, because my grandfather was a slave. I'm on my way, freedom land. My grandfather was Edmund Moore. He was a slave, and he came from Sussex County, Virginia. And he walked here, I believe he said. Took him 6 months to get here. I don't know nothing much about it, because my mama didn't talk much about it. But I would hear some of my grandparents speak about how they were sold, and when this man come by to buy the Negroes, and if they had a horse, a mule, or something in the barn, or something, they were destroyed. They would kill them, set the barn on fire. They would destroy all of that, they told me.
When I was with Daddy, he didn't own any land. He was a sharecropper with the hayman. The man furnished the mules, he fed us, bought us clothes, and he got half of what the crop made. He got his part, you might say clear, but we paid for our part out of what we made. Sometimes we cleared something, and sometimes we didn't.
We day worked. Work by the day, 50 cents a day. Pull it. Yeah, we worked day work, 50 cents a day. I'm telling you, we had to get up early, go to work, and stay late. The men had to get up around 5 o'clock and be at the barn at 5 o'clock.
It was rough. Get up early in the morning. After you milk the cows, you got ready and went to the field. And you work. You talk about a Negro farmers have worked. Not bad. I have went from plowing. I have plowed. I could hitch up a mule and a plow and plow just like a man. I have picked cotton. I've chopped cotton. I could pick over 300 pounds of cotton when cotton was thick.
Chopping cotton, honey. Absolutely, that's what. Well, 12 o'clock, come in and hurry up and eat dinner, and if it was any to eat, and then go on back. I'm on my way. I won't turn back. Oh, honey, it wasn't easy, but just somehow or another we made it.
Somebody would write it up and we'd run their printing machine and print the freedom train up. And I'd take so many, and distribute them out to different people, whoever was interested. I'd offer it to them whether they wanted it or not.
And the point was to get a representative number of blacks to vote.
The voting, so I can be a citizen, so I can be considered somebody.
I just thought, regardless of race, Come on, a question. Does the right thing, say the right thing, do the right thing. I don't see why he can't be treated right. But I can recall that I knew that we was integrating the school, and I knew that there would be problems. I just know that by him being white, he could do what he wanted, and I could do what you say.
When I first went to Ashland, I really didn't have no really visions of what to expect. I thought it would be just like it was going to the all black school that I was going to. I didn't know it was going to be, this hatred stuff that was going on.
I used to cry a lot because like I said, they were just so mean, and you couldn't understand back then why. And we was little children. I was a little girl, and I didn't understand why people was being so mean.
They would call you nigger, but it didn't hurt my feelings. I went on.
Well, when all is said and done, was it worth it?
Yes, it was. It was. It was. But I like to talk about sad. Sometimes I said, Lord, why me? But it got to be somebody.
I would like my kids to know that factor about my family, about the KKK within my family, my great-grandfather being a preacher. I want them to know all of it. I want them to know their heritage, but I want them to learn from that heritage, the mistake that their ancestors made. I want them to learn that mistake that they made. I don't want them to go along and repeat history in a bad way. I don't want that. By and by, Lord, by and by, there's a better home waiting, Lord, in the sky, Lord, in. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
So Afton, are we back?
Yes.
Thanks for showing that clip. And again, I want to thank Ralph for that kind introduction, Afton for inviting me, and Katie and the folk at the center as we talk about the SouthTalk. If there are students in the audience, and both undergraduate and graduate students, we certainly appreciate you being with us, and anybody from the general audience as well. Many of us are still reeling from the death of Bob Robert Moses. He was an African-American treasure, in my judgment, known for his humility, superb organizing skills, and focus on education, specifically the Algebra Project. I am so pleased that I had got the chance to meet him many years ago as a teenager in Holly Springs, Mississippi, and subsequent years in Jackson and Cambridge, Massachusetts, where Rafi is now. I remember one of his famous quotes, even as a teenager in Holly Springs. He would always say, do for local people what they can do for themselves, and not making himself the focus, but the local people were the focus. And he lived that creed. I recall even when people wanted to make him the leader, he always refused, in some cases even left SNCC, because he did not want to be the focus. He wanted the local people to be the focus. I recently just finished looking at the book by William Ferris and with a foreword by Lonnie Bunch, third, who is with the Smithsonian and is also a historian, had a lot to do with the African American Civil Rights Museum there in DC. And he had made a trip to the South with his father. And on that trip, he met a sharecropper. And the sharecropper was asking him about what it means to be a historian. And I guess he explained. And then after that, a fellow named Mr. Prince C. Jenkins said, I hope you help people remember, not just what they want to remember, but what they need to remember. And that just struck me as being so appropriate, because sometimes people don't necessarily remember what they need to remember. They remember what they want to remember, which is a way for me to segue into voices from the Mississippi Hill Country, the Benton County Civil Rights Movement. And Ralph has said something about that in his introduction, which I appreciate very much. I will say that the editorial team was organized in 1964 during what we call Freedom Summer. There had been the Freedom Summer of 1964. So there was a reunion that took place in Holly Springs back in 1964. And Aviva Futorian, who was one of the co-editors on the book, and a friend of mine for many, many years, we attended that reunion. And at that reunion, you have the old SNCC veterans and volunteers coming around trading war stories as veterans do. And I was a vet too, even though a young vet. And so I was part of the storytelling as well. But I think what we found after hearing all these stories from the SNCC veteran, we found that a lot of young people, both African Americans and European Americans, didn't know very much about the significant role that their ancestors and their own family members had played in terms of shaping this, what I call transformative movement, both in the South and of course went on to be impact around the world, or about the role that they played in the shaping of American history as well as Southern history. And I'm so delighted that you are giving SouthTalk this sort of focus. I, along with Aviva and Gloria Clark, who also worked with SNCC, who is from Massachusetts, as a matter of fact, was working at that time in a neighboring county, Temple County. And so we had been talking about the need to capture what we call these great stories that, as Ralph pointed out, these were not iconic people. So these stories had never been told. And oftentimes these people didn't even tell stories to their own children and grandchildren, because in many ways it was too traumatic for them to do so, too painful for them to do so. So they didn't do it. So, but we felt that these people were getting up in age, and it was important for us to try to capture some of these very, very valuable stories. So we did that, and then had these stories transcribed. Now, we were not professionals. We had a little video camera, so we were running around trying to, get these videos done. But we had another reunion in 2003. And then Aviva reached out to a filmmaker, John Lyons, who was also an editor of the book, who lives in Chicago and was an award-winning filmmaker. And we asked him to do something with the footage. And we told him about another reunion that was coming up in 2003. And would he put this footage into a short documentary? And he did that. And he called it My Mind Stayed on Freedom. And of course, when we, at that reunion, we showed it. And a lot of the local people had an opportunity to see what they had on film. And more importantly, they got a chance to, see themselves. Part of it, though, was to get people to tell us about other people. Now, we knew some people. Aviva knew more people than I did because she had worked in Benton County. I had been mostly focused in Holly Springs and Marshall County. So we needed help to reach out to people that we did not know. So these people at that gathering helped us to reach other people. And we knew that a lot of these people were getting up in age. And it was critically important for us to try to get them, get their stories on tape before they passed on. And we're glad we did that, because by the time we got the book, and we weren't even thinking about a book at this point, published, probably a third or to half of those people had already passed on. In terms of a little history here, we became a project in 2007. A fellow named Stephen Klein, who's also a co-editor, joined us. And keep in mind that now we've spent almost 25 years just doing interviews, and we transcribed all of them, although only 1/3 would be featured in voices. A little something about Benton County, because a lot of people don't know anything about the county. So they ask the question all the time, why? Why Benton County? Why not Hinds County? Why not Yazoo County? And we say a lot of work has already been done in the Delta. A lot of stuff has already been done around Jackson, Tupelo. A lot of stuff has already been done down the coast. So the question is, why not Benton County? It was founded in 1870, has always been a very poor county. It's about 60% European American and about 40% African American. In terms of demographics, small landowners and sharecroppers. And you heard from Mr. Smith Richard there in the clip, who was a sharecropper. There were a few large plantations, but unlike the Delta, there were not that many large plantations in Benton County. So there's not much to see, right? Except two major highways, the I-22 and Highway 72. Beautiful national forest, Holly Springs National Forest, and farmland. So if you're a tourist, you just sort of pass on through because there's not much, quote unquote, to see. But for us, there was one major exception. It was one of the first counties in Mississippi to get a federal voting registrar. And we learned this as well, that it also had the highest percentage of African-American voters in the state, particularly during the 1960s. Now, they had started to push for registration even before the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And we were very impressed with that. By comparison with the Mississippi Delta, you had a much higher rate of land ownership. Now, why this land ownership is important, because we have always felt, we meaning being the editors, that we thought that this land ownership would give people the kind of independence and kind of freedom to do some things that people who were sharecroppers would be unwilling to do because they would be kicked off the land, right? Or worse. In any place you have leadership, Benton County being not much of an exception. In this case, we had local leadership, and the person who just stood out was a man named Henry Reeves. And he organized the Citizen Club. And they were very deliberate about that. They named it the Citizen Club because he knew when they were trying to get organized back in the 30s and 40s, that to say that you were NAACP or some other national organization would be a death penalty. So what they did was they decided to name themselves a Citizen Club, which, you know, relates to people thought they were just going to church. People thought they were just, you know, maybe getting together to talk about things involving family. And so that was a way, that was a nice decoy for them to get organized. He was not the only local leader. There were many, you will see in the clip and other clips that you will see in the future, but he was the one that the people just talked about over and over and over. And so we came to the conclusion that this guy was a major mentor and it was a living example for their lives. I mean, we had an example of when a child became 18, he knew who they all, he knew them. And so he would personally go to them and encourage these, but at that time, 21-year-olds to go and register to vote. And to show you the kind of respect they had for him, even those who didn't want to venture down to the courthouse and try to vote, they would avoid him because they knew if Mr. Reeves was coming, they were going to have to give him some kind of excuse. And most of the time, he was not going to accept the excuse, even if he had to take them down there to get them at least attempt to register to vote. This man had been at the turn of the century, born about 1900, and he had been homeschooled by his mama. So she understood the importance of education, even at the turn of the century for Black people in Benton County. One of his nephews that we interviewed, who is now deceased, lives in Chicago, had been an Army veteran, said, you know, if my uncle had been educated, they would have killed him. Wouldn't have been any question. But because he was not formally educated, he could sort of stay under the radar, still get his work done, still do what he wanted to do, but still keep himself relatively safe. So what about these people? What were they passionate about? Trying to make a life. The right to vote, attempting multiple times to vote. We have this lady, Miss Burnett of Alexander, who attempted to vote 13 times before she was successful. And you know, at that time, what they would do, they would put your name in the local newspaper if you went down to the courthouse to try to register. And then what that meant, if you were a sharecropper, you were thrown off the land, or even worse. Education. These folk wanted the best education for their children because they knew that they and their parents and their grandparents had not gotten an education and had been woefully neglected by the state, by the county, and by the local school district. the segregation is not that Black people necessarily want to see their old kids sit in the classroom with white students, but they knew that segregation was like slavery by another name, and they knew they were not going to get the textbooks they needed, they were not going to get the quality teachers they needed, and so therefore they pushed for desegregation and were the first to send their kids to integrate the school system there in Benton County. Land and home ownership. I mentioned Mr. Reed being a man who constantly preached independence. So he was always telling people, get your land if you can buy land, because land ownership is so important. Owning homes. People wanted, the people we interviewed, they were so proud when they would tell us about the first FHA loan that they got. And you know, FHA is discriminated against Black people. So it's very difficult to get loans to get houses. But those people who did, they struggled to do it and they were successful. The religion and the church is prominent with these people. And they knew it was a place to feel free. They knew it was a place to relax. They knew it was a place where they could have authority and they could make decisions. And they knew it was a place where their kids could be a staging area for their kids and for their children. One of the people we interviewed, Miss Jane Strickland, who's 102 years old, had a beautiful voice and still remembered things about her husband. She loved her husband dearly. And she had children in her room helping her to remember certain things. But one of the things she did very well at the close of the interview was she sang us a song. And I said to her, how beautiful the song. And then we talked about how the movement has been sustained without the singing, about the freedom songs, without the spirituals, because people, that was a way for them to get through a day. That was a way for them to get through a week. And their freedom. They talked about this need to get their freedom. And being free from fear and violence. Ms. Eridol Johnson, who was not featured on that clip, but is in another clip we did, said, when we asked her why didn't she participate in the movement, why didn't she get involved? And she said, you know, I'm just gonna tell the truth. Almost like she felt ashamed. She said, I was just scared. I was just scared. And there were other people who were like Miss Eldora, who would just would not tell you that, but they knew fear was the big elephant in the room. And quoting from Miss Sarah Robertson, and I have a cup here called Vote Child Vote that I have in her honor. And she's up on the wall there. You can see that picture in the wall, Miss Sarah Robertson. She said, you know, you don't have to do nothing to get killed. That's the woman at the bottom. You don't have to do nothing to get killed. I just thought about that. That's a heavy statement. You know, you can just kill, but then it has implications for where we are now. You don't have to be doing anything to get killed. And Katie Reeves, who had lived with polio, and then they would put her in the classroom and put her in the back of the classroom and just stay in that seat all day. And she said, you know, they treat you wrong for nothing. And there was multiple interviews we had involving Miss Peggy Simpson talking about apartheid. She was a white woman who had come down and married a man from Mississippi, a Black man from Mississippi, and they were living in a place called Snow Lake Shores. And they were the only integrated couple out there. So it was not the greatest environment, but she said her husband would say, you know, you just have to ignore people. It's their problem. It's not our problem. It's their problem. And she said she learned from that. And one of the things that struck me about what she said was this notion of invisibility, that you just felt invisible. And it reminded me of the novelist Ralph Ellison in the book Invisible Man. Another family, Doyle's family, there was a large group of them. They had lived on a plantation. They did sharecrop there in Benton County. And they had moved on to Memphis when we interviewed them. And she said, you know, one of the things that my parents said to us as siblings is that we want you to make a living with your pencil. We don't want to be sharecroppers. And she said to us, they said to us, you know, real proudly, you know, we are now all of us are now making a living with a pencil. And then Mr. Crawford, quoting from Mr. Crawford, and he said he witnessed with his father a lynching that took place in Benton County as a boy. And they went to the courthouse and the Black body was laying out on the courthouse lawn. And he said there's one of the white racists that had lynched the Black man said to the father and to the boy, doesn't that boy have on a pretty necktie? doesn't that boy have on a pretty necktie? And Mr. Crawford Sr. said to him, I don't know what he has on, son. Let's go. And of course, from Miss Ross and from Miss Crystal Stewart saying, things were not great, but they're better than what they used to be. We interviewed Bubba Griffin, who is now a supervisor there in Benton County. And they were asking him about when America would become a more perfect union. And he says, you know, when Jesus come back. And Spence Richard, being the philosopher that he is, a man that only got an 8th grade education and couldn't match any philosophy professor that I had at Brandeis, but never had the opportunity to go on and get on a graduate degree and be the philosopher that he was. He said, you know, when you're educated, a job looks for you, but when you're not educated or trained, you have to look for a job. Well, Miss Robinson quoting again from Mr. Reeves, whom the book is dedicated, saying, you know, you have to make white people do right. They're not going to do right on their own. You have to make white people do right. They're not going to do right on their own. Mark Shanika, a friend of mine who reviewed the book, says, you know, these stories about being witness to everyday indignities and struggles and courage of average people, to Ralph's point earlier, caught in a horrendous system. And although a caste system that Isabel Wilkerson talks about in her book, Caste, you know, we have apartheid and we had a caste system and we have a closed society. We all know about that. It was closed to both Blacks and whites. And this woman, Lily Reed Duffy, after enduring so many indignities and now living in Chicago, when we interviewed her, she said, the kids I went to school with that I integrated into, it wasn't easy for them either. And then she goes on the stage, she said, I shed tears, mostly for the ones that were ignorant. So while voices focus clearly on the local, there's a powerful universal message. There's a friend of mine in Vietnam that we communicate with. He's bought the book, he's read the book, and he relates to the stories in the book. So it has a universal message as well. We think these important local people, speaking about life's events, which happened over a century ago, have much to say about our history and our current situation in this place we call the Democratic Republic of America. And so I have gone on for more than my length of time, so I'm more than willing now to entertain any Q&A. You can see I still get emotional because these stories can be hard to mention. I mean, there's some of them that are so delightful and uplifting and courageous, and it's just beautiful. But then there are other stories that just tears out the heart. So,
well, I'd like to open. I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but what I really was thinking about as you were talking about this, Roy, was that connection back to slavery, and then the trauma, and the continuing trauma, and that connection of that to freedom. That's something that I was very much taken by, and then looping it back around to citizenship, that the group that was doing the work of the NAACP was calling itself a citizenship club. And that's really significant, I think, that they're thinking in those terms. I guess my question is, what do you see as the outgrowth? What positive forces have come through out of that trauma?
Well,
how people use that trauma to try to heal in some way, maybe.
I think that's right. You will notice from the clip and from other stories that you'll read in the book, there are people are really closely connected to the institution of slavery. for example, with the first clip we saw with Miss Evelyn Robinson, clearly she says her grandfather, but really it was her father who was a slave. And so slavery was very close, right? Or we have examples of Miss Jessie May Epps talking about her parents walking all the way from Virginia to Mississippi, and that they had been slaves back in Virginia. And one of the things I think we don't understand, even though the slave trade ended in 1807, that there was a lot of what I call domestic slavery going on when people moved from the North, i.e. North Carolina, Virginia, other places, Rhode Island, to the South. And so that was a sort of the second slave trade in my judgment. And so it's interesting to see just how closely connected this slavery institution was. But you get to a person like Miss Robinson, who you're absolutely right, who talks about citizenship a great deal. And one of the things she says is, I don't think I can be a citizen until I have a right to vote. And therefore, I'm willing to give it all. I'm willing to make all the sacrifices, whatever it takes. We are going to get registered to vote because we know that voting will give us some semblance of freedom and independence that we do not have as non-voters. So they were able to make that shift from being sharecroppers or being enslaved to the need to say, there's an American dream out there that says that I'm a democratic republic and everybody should be treated a certain way under the Constitution. And almost like even before King, they were saying, we think we need to push that envelope to make that happen, not only for our children, but for ourselves. I mean, for example, Miss Burns Alexander that I mentioned earlier, that had tried to register for 13 times, knowing that each time she tried to register, her name was going to be put in a newspaper that's going to put herself and her family in danger of being thrown off the plantation, so to speak, and yet was willing to take that risk because she felt that was so important that nothing really other than maybe God, their God, was more important than getting that, and their family getting that right to vote. So you were absolutely right. I think people saw, yes, we've had trauma, but yet we can deal with that trauma. Good example, we asked Mr. Crawford, because he had witnessed that a lynching as a child, and he had seen the fear that was in his father. We asked him if he in fact was scared. He said no, he was not scared after that. It made him angry. But he learned later when working with Mr. Reeves to put that anger into action, to do something concrete, like get registered to vote, like, buy you a house, like try to buy you some land, try to be as independent as you can be in the society that yet does not value you as a full human being. So I'm sorry I went on too long.
That's all right. And so I have a question here from Barbara Phillips. And Barbara's question is, have there been occasions for the young people of Benton County to engage with elders? Are there young people who see themselves as building upon this historical foundation?
Well, to some extent, it's a mixed bag, and we are a little bit disappointed about that. One of the things that we wanted to do, and we've tried to do by working with the school system, for example, we wanted to, because John has such expertise with the camera, and because Aviva and I have learned to interview people, we wanted to train as many young people as we could to carry on this tradition of oral history. I must tell you that we've not gotten a lot of takers. We've gotten 2 or 3 young people to step up and show real interest. I will say this though, we had when we opened our office up, we had a dedication and we invited a number of community people to come, including some young people. And some of these young people saw what their ancestors had done for the first time on film. And 2 or 3 of the young people broke down because they had no idea that their mamas and grandmamas and granddaddies and uncles had been so involved. One of the problems we have with sustaining this is in a place like Benton County, which is not too far from Memphis, as you know, and because the education system leaves a lot to be desired, and because the economic system leaves a lot to be desired, a lot of young people, when they, if they do graduate high school, they leave the county altogether. And so what you have there now is kind of like a retirement community because it's such a beautiful place. And a lot of older people from other places now are coming, but the young people are leaving. And that includes Black and white. And so the least we could do, we thought we could get this on record. We could get it in a book. We're working on a documentary, and it'll be there for them to at least see where they came from, even if they're not there in Benton County to carry on this wonderful and compelling tradition.
Great. And then here's a question from Terry Buffington. And he says that your voice is a powerful tool. And I have to agree with him. Are you taking this important commentary to the local school system? So I cannot see myself and several others suggestions on how to have this this get out there into the world. So is this something you're thinking about doing in the Benton County school system?
We have tried. We've got a lot of pushback. We've tried since day one. Benton County, for example, we tried not just in terms of Benton County. You know, I served on the State Education Civil Rights Commission for a number of years, and we wanted, because civil rights is supposed to be, and this is really more than civil rights, it's economics, it's philosophy, it's you name it, it's political science, it's you name it, it's all the disciplines. But we've gotten a lot of pushback from the people at the State Department, because they always say, well, it's a local thing and the local superintendents make the decision. So we went to the local superintendent many years ago now, before the book even came out, and said, look, we got this book here. I even gave copies to the library. I gave free copies to the history teacher. I gave free copies to the principal at the time, and free copies to the superintendent at the time. The problem is in Benton County, there's been so much instability that they can't keep a superintendent more than a couple of years. It's very difficult to keep a principal more than a couple of years. So we try to get a program going. And so it's been difficult to get it off the ground. Yes, there have been attempts. The other thing is, and there's a new superintendent now, and I shared a copy of the book with him. He said we'll read it in a couple of months. The idea being that we felt that they need to buy in the fact that this, not only are they reading about something out there in the United States of America that's alien, quote unquote, but they have history right there in their own county, right, in their own town, that these are people who have made tremendous contributions that could relate very well to the discipline. But again, I don't know whether it's fear, I don't know whether it's pushback, I don't know whether it's bureaucracy, where you did them with the big book companies and they have a deal that they're gonna get their books in the curriculum, and anything that's not part of that, kind of left out. So yeah, we've attempted. It's been a mixed bag. We'll keep trying to push it. We want it to be a book that can be used at the college level, high school level, as well as the middle school and elementary school level. We think it's just that important, but we got to get people to buy into it.
Yeah. Here's a question from Jody Skipper, one of our Southern Studies faculty members. She wants to know what experiences people seem to want to share most about their lives. What do they seem hesitant to share? And what they seem to want people to learn from their life experiences?
All these questions have been excellent questions. I'll shift gears for just a second and talk about some of the European Americans that we interviewed. And you don't see my notes now, but in my notes in the book, we talked about the process of how we interviewed people and who we interviewed, and how many would be present during the interview. With most of the whites that we interviewed, and we have some whites in the book as well, I did not participate in those interviews, and we made a conscious decision. And because we wanted to make sure that we wanted people to be very candid about what they were to say, and we wanted them to tell the truth. And what we found was, among some of the whites that we interviewed, the most sensitive subject had to do with race. And in case of one man that was interviewed, who had been a large landowner and had a number of sharecroppers living on his place, and he gave an example of he raised cotton, and one of his helpers, one of his workers, apparently was supposed to be putting poison on the cotton to kill insects, ended up putting herbicide on the cotton. And then he lost his crop. And so the man said, you know, that nigga was so stupid that he, you know, he poisoned, he destroyed my crop. And one of the things that I wanted to say to him, you know, I didn't talk to him, but, you know, if I had a chance to have a dialogue with him, I would say, you know, that may not have been on purpose. I may not have been by accident. That could have been on purpose. But so, and then there was another example of a young man who apparently expressed some real problem with integration in terms of his daughter and son dating Black girls or vice versa, Black boys or vice versa. And in one case, he was in the garage with his daughter standing there listening to him. He was 19. And he said, you know, if my daughter or my son goes out and dates a person of another race and tries to bring him home, I'll never talk to him again. They'll never be welcome back in this house. I think there was a follow-up question about whether or not if you had a grandchild, would you own that grandchild? The answer was emphatically no. So there was that kind of candor that was expressed among some of the whites. I think of some of the Blacks we interviewed, some of them was reluctant to tell their stories because, as you mentioned, that there was trauma. And when it comes to veterans of the civil rights movement, people don't want to open up. I think one of the reasons why they opened up to us was because we knew some of the people we interviewed. And then we talked to other people that we knew and got them to talk to people. So one of the things that we found is that you cannot go in and interview people as strangers, that you have to build relationships with them. Either they know you or they know about you, or you have to take the time to build relationships. Because if you don't do that, you're not gonna get the candor from Blacks or whites that we were looking for. And I think we were able to get people to be very candid, notwithstanding the trauma. But yeah, it was very painful. One of the things we found though, also the people we interviewed, that we tried to go to their comfort zone. So anywhere they wanted to be interviewed, whether it was a living room or a kitchen or outdoors on the pecan tree, we did that. We did not set the agenda. We allowed them to set the agenda. Once they got the comfort zone they wanted, then we did it. We would ask them, for example, is it okay if we video you as well as audio? And they would have to say yes. If they said no, we stopped. So we gave utmost respect to the people we interviewed because we knew there were a lot of people were telling these stories for the first time. The good example, some of these children and grandchildren have now read the book and now found out about their moms and dads and uncles. They said, I didn't know that ever happened. I had no idea that my grandfather had seen that. I have no idea that was the case because they never told us.
Well, I think that goes back to the trauma.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we saw it. And we saw it, you know, throughout. But you're right. In addition to that, though, we also just saw such optimism. You know, I wonder sometimes, you know, as we listen to Miss Emmeline Robinson talk about, you know, how she saw how things were destroyed, you know, and yet was not bitter. Or we have the case of Mr. Nunley and Mr. Thompson. These were not violent people, but those two guys would do what's necessary to defend themselves. Matter of fact, in a couple of cases, the Klan came in and made an attempt to burn down the Citizen Clubhouse. And the FBI, as you know, at that time was not there to protect you. They just simply collected data. And so, on the way out there, Mr. Nunley and Mr. Thompson, you know, helped run the Klan away. So, and they were putting their lives on line, but they were people that were defensive. They made it clear that they're not going to be violent, but they also made it clear if anybody attempted to harm them in any way, or harm their family in any way, or harm that Citizen Club in any way, that they would defend themselves. And they meant that. As a matter of fact, one of the ladies that we interviewed said Mr. Nunley and Mr. Thompson were about the two bravest Black people they'd ever seen.
Here's a related question, and you're thinking about the struggle to get to vote in Benton County. Are people continuing to register to vote in Benton County? Has that legacy been continued of voting?
I think the legacy has been continued. As I pointed out, though, a lot of young people have left. So the people, this my generation older are still voting. However, like in a lot of places, we have all these restrictions on voting, and that makes it difficult. But I find that this generation, the one that we interviewed, they continue to participate. I do see a drop off among some of the young people, primarily because we don't have a Mr. Reeves around anymore. And I'm not saying that there are not some organization, but you don't have a Mr. Reed around anymore who just constantly stay on your case and say, this is important. This is something we're going to do because it's necessary to do. And we're not going to take no for an answer. And then, people make excuses. I've heard people make excuses when I've gotten on a case a couple of times, particularly young people, where, we got family, we're working in Memphis. When we get home, we're tired, we don't bother. And I said, well, remember what your ancestors did. They were tired. They worked for $2 a day. They worked for 50 cents a day, and they went and registered. The least you can do is go and register. And one of the things I would say about one of the young people that we interviewed in the book, he's the last person I think we feature, as he said that he felt Purdue. He said he felt he has an obligation to carry on and to continue that legacy. And he doesn't want to see that legacy die. So I got some encouragement from that.
Barbara Phillips has another question. Are there any Black elected officials in Benton County?
Yes, there are a couple of school board members. There's one Black elected supervisor, the one that I quoted from earlier, Bubba Griffin. There was a Black superintendent there, a brilliant young man, but at the time before they had the appointed superintendent, they had elected superintendent. And Benton County, I didn't get into that, but it's also had a history of corruption. They have had a history of supervisors going to jail during the time when Ray Mavis was over the audit department for all kinds of corruption. So they've had that. Yeah, they have the one Black supervisor, a couple of school board members, and I think election commissioners. That's about it. In terms of having real political impact, I don't think the numbers have been such that they could ever have the kind of impact that you have in a county where you have, say, a majority, or at least, a greater number in the elected position.
Okay. So do you want to kind of sum up now and talk about the other South Talks? And want to thank you, Roy. This has been really great. And I would urge everyone, if you haven't gotten a copy of this book, to please get a copy and to share it with others and talk with other people about this book. I know that I will be doing that.
Well, thank you very much. And I just have a little postcard there. And of course, Ralph has already mentioned the book, which you can get published by the press, but we also have an independently published book, ebook you can get. So again, I think this story, as I said earlier, is universal, even though the focus is on just a small county. And it was a joy to do. And we can't wait to finish this documentary.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. DeBerry.
Thank you for the invite.
You're welcome. And my wheels are turning. I'll say that much publicly and then follow up with you, because I think that there are some ways that we can get some students involved and know more about the story. And I'll talk to Katie, and we will be back in touch with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I was not trying to be rude, you all, by putting things in the chat while Dr. DeBerry and you all were asking questions, but I wanted you to be aware of some upcoming events, and one that I forgot. So go to our website for Friday, this coming Friday, September 10th. We have an outdoor event opportunity at the Old Armory Pavilion. Mississippi Creates is a new series. It's a partnership with the Yakna Patapa Arts Council and see, I got it.
You got it.
And SouthTalk, an institute of the center. They have some of our MFA students created 2 films about local musicians, Tyler Keith, who is a graduate of the Southern Studies MA and MFA program. He is also a musician. And Schaefer Yana is her name. They're both local musicians. And so Schaefer will perform, and we will premiere both of those events. Bring your own chair, bring your own refreshment. Starts at 8 p.m. You can start setting up at 7:30. And that's where we have our Oxford Community Market. That's this Friday. Weather should be nice. And then I put in the chat at the beginning of next week, Monday, September 13th, another virtual event. It is a partnership with the Living Music Resource, which is hosted by Nancy Mariah Balish, the music department's chair, and she will be in conversation with Scott Beretta and Sade Thomas, and they will talk about Voices of Mississippi. We've talked a lot about Bill Ferris, who was our founding director here at the center. His box set, his Grammy Award-winning box set, has become a stage production, and it will premiere next Tuesday here on our campus at 7:30. So I put both of those details in the chat. I got a little fancy. See, when you've been doing this for 2 years, you learn how to drop files in the chat. Did y'all get them? Were you able to open them? Okay. That was the first time doing that. And again, I could go on and on, but I won't. Take a look at our website for upcoming events. And thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Great job. Just great job being with you. Thanks for being with you, and thanks for the program.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Afton.
Thank you, Al. See you all. Thank you.
Okay.
Enjoy that East Coast.
Okay, I will.